We've made it to the prophet Zephaniah, whom Yahweh sent to the southern kingdom of Judah with the message of complete destruction. How else do you say that? A message of complete destruction for almost 3 full chapters, and then a message of restoration after that. Judah, and not only Judah this time, but the surrounding Gentile nations all get condemned under God's message through Zephaniah. Not only is he going to destroy Judah, but he intends to destroy so many of the surrounding nations also. But the odd thing is, and keep this in mind while we're reading this, going through this book, at least as deep as we're going to go into it, which is not very deep, Zephaniah was a prophet during one of the 2 greatest revivals in Jewish history. Yes, the Jews were idolatrous most of their history, but Zephaniah was called by God in a time when Josiah was the king and was running one of the greatest spiritual revivals in Judah's history. So how can this be is the question that pops off the page. You would think that with Josiah having the reforms, finding the book of the law, reading the law, tearing his clothes, making all the people join in covenant relationship and revival, restoration of the covenant with Yahweh to keep the Mosaic law, you would think that God would have a different message through Zephaniah. Yet he doesn't. It's a message of complete destruction. Sometimes our revivals are too little, too late. And in this case, we see that. I'll show you verses tonight where God had already decreed judgment because of what one of the former kings, not Josiah, not his father, but his grandfather, what his grandfather, King Manasseh, had done. God had already decreed complete destruction of Judah and Jerusalem. So even though years later, many years later, Josiah, this young boy, comes around and leads revival, it's just too little and it's too late. God allows it. Well, we'll read it in the scriptures. Zephaniah 1:1, to get back into this quickly, the word of the Lord which came to Zephaniah, son of Cushi, son of Gedaliah, son of Amariah, son of Hezekiah. Now Hezekiah is the king. He's the great-grandfather of this prophet Zephaniah. And Zephaniah wrote in the days of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah. Hezekiah was a previous king. Josiah is the current king. And Zephaniah is their family member. Zephaniah is the great-grandson of Hezekiah, and he's at least a distant cousin to Josiah, off a different branch of Hezekiah's line. He's related to both of these men. One of them dead and gone, Hezekiah. One of them, Josiah, ruling Judah at this time righteously. Who is Zephaniah? Quickly, his name means Yahweh hides, or Yahweh has hidden. You can read what it is that Yahweh does in the message through Zephaniah and decide what is it, how is it that Yahweh hides or Yahweh has hidden? How does that apply to Zephaniah's message? I'll leave that to you. Number 2, he preaches the word of the Lord. Number 1, or Zephaniah 1:1 says, the word of the Lord which came to Zephaniah. He's given a message direct from God, no fluff, no filler. He is simply saying the words that God gave him to say. He is royalty, as I just described to you. He's a royal family member. He is a blue blood. He's in the line of the kings of Judah. He is a great-grandson of David. He's a Judahite in the royal family, simply not in the kingly family, but in the cousins of the kings. He's from the royal family, the ruling class of King David through Hezekiah, his great-grandfather. He's arguably the greatest king Israel ever had. I'm going to take you back to the book of Kings, 2 Kings. We're going to read about Hezekiah and what went wrong. This royal lineage makes Zephaniah the prophet with the highest social standing and prominence in all of the Old Testament, which is interesting because most people, if you ask them, Is there a Zephaniah? Is there a book of Zephaniah in the Bible? I bet most people would say, that doesn't ring a bell. I don't think so. Yet he has the highest social standing and the highest prominence of all in the Old Testament. Just an interesting fact. He's a relative of the current king of Judah, Josiah. It says, the word of the Lord which came to Zephaniah in the days of Josiah. Josiah is running an incredibly successful revival in Judah. But again, too little, too late. This man, Zephaniah, lives in Jerusalem. From verse 4, we pick up that fact. He is most likely a resident of Jerusalem because as he writes, he says, from this place, referring to Jerusalem, and he speaks as if he's there. And number 6, the date of the book, 625 BC. This is only 20 years before the southern kingdom of Judah the destruction of the southern kingdom begins in 605 BC. So only 20 years later, God starts to begin taking the Jews out of the land little by little. One of the first Jews to leave the land in 605 BC, the prophet Daniel. His 3 friends, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, who were renamed, you may know them better as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So 625 BC, Zephaniah prophesied at the same time that Jeremiah did. Of course, Jeremiah had a longer ministry over many, many more years, where Zephaniah only had this one message that God had him deliver in the year 625 BC. We'll talk more about how Jeremiah had a similar message of impending judgment next week, probably. But Jeremiah not only prophesied about Yahweh destroying Jerusalem and Judah, he witnessed it firsthand. That's why Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet. He was hoping that there was a way that Israel, Judah could come back to God and be restored, but it didn't happen. What was Zephaniah's message? We've got to get to these 2 Kings quotes. What was Zephaniah's message? I've got the verses there from chapter 1, verse 2, all the way to 3, verse 8. It's only a 3-chapter book. And the message is, the main message for 3 chapters, a bold declaration of the imminent release of God's wrath on Judah and other Gentile nations. The word nations should be in there. So Zephaniah gives bold word from the Lord. Yes, Josiah is in office. Yes, Josiah is the king. Yes, Josiah is leading a revival. Yes, Josiah has crushed the idols. He's crushed the sacred pillars. Yes, Josiah has done this and done that and done that. But I've already made a decree based on what has happened before Josiah. Judgment on all the earth. If you break that section, those 3 verses are 3 chapters down. The first couple of verses of chapter 1, judgment on all the earth. In verse 4 of chapter 1, he starts speaking of the judgment on Judah and Jerusalem itself. The kingdom of Judah, the city of Jerusalem, so the tribes of Judah and Benjamin are the tribes that make up the kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom. That's the judgments coming on them. After that, judgment on the surrounding nations. In the middle of chapter 2, he starts saying, not only am I going to wipe Jerusalem and Judah like one wipes a dish, I'm also going to destroy these surrounding nations. He talks of that for the bulk of chapter 2, and then he starts backtracking. It goes up to the destruction of the nations, and then it goes back down. So you'll see that the first B, judgment on Judah, is repeated in the little b, B prime, judgment on Jerusalem again. And then in A, judgment on all the earth, which is where it started. The A's are similar. And then, because we have to talk about something happy, the day of Yahweh's restoration in chapter 3, one of the greatest periods of restoration, or one of the greatest treatises on the restoration, is in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9, all the way to verse 20, when he speaks of the great restoration of all things that God will bring about, the restoration of the nations, and later the restoration of not only Judah, but all Israel. Zephaniah teaches about it. Zephaniah, again, we're about there. 2 Kings chapter 23. We're going to go through 2 Kings verse 19, or chapter 19, chapter 20, chapter 21. I'm going to pull things out from these chapters to show you how it's possible that Zephaniah is writing in a period of revival when things should be, when the message you would think would be flowery, but it's not. Again, he's the great-grandson of King Hezekiah, and it's very important to know and follow the history of the kings from Hezekiah, great-grandpa, to the current King Josiah. What happened in the reign of these four kings, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Amon, and now Josiah? What happened in the reign of these four kings? You went from a great king in Hezekiah to the other great king in Josiah. What happened in the middle that was so negative that the two positives on the outside don't cancel it out? Hezekiah was a great obedient king. This is what I'm trying to say. Hezekiah was a great obedient king, the great grandfather of this prophet, a great obedient, God-honoring, worshiping king. And Zephaniah is writing at a period when there's another great, godly, Yahweh-worshiping, Mosaic law following king. You would think things would be pretty good in Judah, but they're not. How can Yahweh give a message of doom through Zephaniah? That becomes the question. Speaking of Hezekiah, I take you to this chapter. Just going to look historically at a bunch of verses and see what happened between the great King Hezekiah and the great King Josiah, that their positive influence in the land wasn't enough to turn the tide and change God's decree of destruction. Zephaniah's great-grandfather is the topic in 2 Kings 23. Before him, there was no king like him. We're speaking of Hezekiah. It says in Zephaniah 1:1, Hezekiah was the great-grandson, Zephaniah was the great-grandson of King Hezekiah. So we've got to go back. And we got to look at Hezekiah and see, why is it when I don't want to say that. Go too far off. 2 Kings 23, speaking of Hezekiah, this is Hezekiah the king. Before him there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord Yahweh with all his heart, with all his soul, with all his might. Sounds just like Deuteronomy chapter 6. He's doing it right. According to all the law of Moses, he's doing it right. He's not making up his own law. He's not worshiping false gods. He's worshiping Yahweh alone according to the laws that God gave the Jews through Moses on Mount Sinai. Great king, no king like him, nor did any like him arise after him. You'll see a very similar statement about Josiah. They worshiped the Lord in slightly different ways. All I mean by that is their strengths were different. But Hezekiah was a man who followed the law according to this book. He turned to Yahweh with all his heart, soul, and might, his strength. He was doing right by Yahweh. Great king. So I back up. This is the end. 2 Kings 23 is the end statement about King Hezekiah. I want to go back and look at what Hezekiah did. Why is it that the scripture calls him this great man? What is it that made him so praiseworthy in God's eyes? So I'm backing up from 2 Kings 23 to 2 Kings 19. Look what it says he did. Just a couple of things. You'll have to go read it to get all of it. Hezekiah prayed before Yahweh, and he said, O Yahweh, the God of Israel, who are enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone, not Baal, not Asherah, Dagon, Milcom, Molech, all of the false satanic gods. Hezekiah worships the one true God only, Yahweh. He says, you are the God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. So he praises him as being the only God there is. There's only one God. Hezekiah knows it. There's only one creator. Hezekiah knows it. There's only one true God, faithfully true and loyal God. Hezekiah knows it. His name is Yahweh, and Hezekiah worships Yahweh only. He's an obedient king who led Judah righteously. This is Zephaniah's great-grandfather. In the next chapter it says, after Hezekiah died, it says in chapter 20, verse 21, so Hezekiah slept with his fathers after this long reign, and Manasseh, his son, became king in his place. Anybody know what Manasseh is famous for? He's famous for sending his son through the fire. He's the worst king that Judah ever had. He's the most evil man that was ever king in David's line. He is a great, you count the greats, I don't know the number, grandson of King David himself. And he's a great, you count the greats, grandfather of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the great King Jesus. That's who this man is. He's in Jesus' family tree. He is the king of Judah, and he's the most evil king who ever lived in Judah, equal to Ahab, who is the most evil king of the northern kingdom that's already gone in exile. So Hezekiah dies, this great king dies, and his own flesh and blood, his own son, Manasseh, becomes king in his place. Now we have to see, what did he do? In the next chapter, after Hezekiah, and I didn't show you the chapters, but he tore down the sacred pillars, crushed all these things. I mean, basically purified Judah as best as he could. And look what his own son does. It says in 2 Kings 21 verse 3, he, talking about Manasseh, he rebuilt the high places which Hezekiah his father had destroyed. How long does it take to destroy a society? How many generations? What's the number? 1. You're looking at it right here. 1 generation. He rebuilt the high places, the satanic altars to all Satan's false gods that his father Hezekiah had destroyed. He erected all altars for Baal and made an Asherah. That's a totem pole-like female likeness, an Asherah pole, as Ahab, king of Israel, had done. Interesting that it equates these two men, because Ahab was the most evil king that ever existed in the north, and this man, Manasseh, is the most evil king that ever existed in the south. He worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. Just quickly, turn to Deuteronomy chapter 4. Got to be quick about it. I'm going to run out of time. Deuteronomy chapter 4. I just like to show you verses when they pop into my head. In verse 19, read what it says. The scripture says here that this man Manasseh, worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. They were warned about that. In Deuteronomy 4:19 it says, and beware not to lift up your eyes to heaven and see the hosts thereof, the sun and the moon and the stars and all the host of heaven, and be drawn away and worship them and serve them, those which the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven. Let me tell you something interesting that I learned just the other day. I was looking up the etymology, the history of the name Allah. Allah, the Muslim God. So-called Muslim God. False God, satanic, no question. One true God, his name is Yahweh, the creator of all things. Any other God is false. An imaginative God. And this God, Allah, when you do the etymology of his name and go back to what I typed in was, what ancient God is most similar to the modern God Allah? And the question, or the answer came back, and I forget what his name was, but he's the moon god. What does it say right here? Be careful. I mean, you got billions of people in this world that are Muslim, and what do? In modern day parlance, they look up at the heaven, and they look at the moon, and they're drawn away and worship the God of the moon. They call him Allah. Interesting, isn't it? Nothing new under the sun. Because what does it say here? Nothing new under the sun, meaning that there's no new sin. There's nothing that God hasn't seen. These things continue going over again. It says that this man Manasseh worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. Same thing going on today. The next verse says, continuing what he did, I'm showing you all these things because God is about to make a decree that cannot be changed. I will crush Jerusalem because of what this man did. The same way, 100 and so years earlier, he said in 1 Kings chapter 11, I will divide Israel. I will crush the unity of the nation and divide you into two pieces, north and south, because of what this man Solomon has done. And here he says, concerning Solomon's great-great-great-great-grandson, Manasseh, I'm going to destroy the whole city, the temple, all of it, because of what you're doing. He built altars in the house of the Lord. What's another name for the house of the Lord? The temple. Imagine that. The king of Israel, who's supposed to walk with the high priest in the leadership of the people Israel in the worship of their God. And what does he do instead of worshiping Yahweh? But he uses the temple itself and brings in his idols into God's holy place. He built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, in Jerusalem I will put my name. Not Baal, not Asherah, not Milcom, not Dagon. Manasseh said, I'll do it anyway. And he's going to pay a price and bring all of Judah and Jerusalem down with him. He built altars for all the host of heaven, the sun, the moon, the stars. We worship the sun god on earth. I mean, we gather on the first day of the week. What do we call it? What do we call the next day of the week? Moon Day. Woden's Day, Moon's Day, Twig's Day, Frigg's Day. It's all host of heaven. And whoever made our days of the week that obviously we are not worshiping that, but we are privy to or pray to it because we say, I'll see you Sunday. When we leave today, we'll say, see you Sunday, and we are bowing, not bowing, but you know what I mean. We are at least using the name of the sun deity. Crazy world. In Jerusalem I will put my name, is what the Lord had said. Manasseh said, I'll put the names of all the false gods in here. I'll worship who I want to. Oh, you will. He built altars for all the host of heaven in the two courts of the house of the Lord. Imagine, there were altars all over the Temple Mount. Imagine such a thing from the king of the Jews himself, inviting Solomon had done much the same thing. He made his son, here's the fame, you don't read this about any other king, he made his son pass through the fire. That means he took one of his own offspring, one of his own male children, and sacrificed that child to a false god, probably on one of these altars at the Jewish temple. He practiced witchcraft. He used divination. He dealt with mediums and spiritists. Who was his father again? Somebody tell me. Hezekiah. Let me read you what it says about Hezekiah one more time. Before him there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord Yahweh with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses. Nor did any like him arise after him. This is that man's son. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. And then you hear God's response to Manasseh's antics. Same chapter, a few verses later. I move from verse 6 to verse 11. It says, because Manasseh, king of Judah, has done these abominations, having done wickedly more than all of the Amorites did who were before him. Remember, in the days of Joshua, God said, go into the land and purify it. Kill everything that breathes among the 7 nations in the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, the Girgashite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Hittite, the Jebusite, the Amorite, the Canaanite. 7 nations, he said, go in and kill all of it. I need the land purified so that you can worship me in purity. And the Bible says that after that declaration of God telling Joshua, kill everything that breathes of these 7 nations, it says that Manasseh, the king of Judah, the Jewish king, did more wicked than all the kings of the Amorites who were before him. All the people in Joshua's day that God made this decree about, they must all die. If one of them survives, the land will be polluted and defiled. Kill all of them. Men, women, children, animal, everything that breathes, I'm destroying them. I've given them 400 years. I've given them 400 years to get right with me. They refuse. I need to purify the land and give this land to Israel. And Manasseh, the king representing Israel, has done more against God than those nations did. He has also made Judah sin with his idol. So he brought idolatry. What did this guy do but bring idolatry back into vogue? His father had crushed it, had tried to purify Judah of these things, and his own son reversed all that spiritual cleansing, reversed all that Hezekiah brought to Judah. He made sinning the in thing, idolatry, the worship of all the false gods, the in thing, the cool thing, the thing that's in vogue, the thing that society is doing. Instead of leading the Jewish people as he should have, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, instead of leading them to worship Yahweh, he invited them to walk away from Yahweh and to fully embrace Satan's false god pantheon. And so they did it. The leader of a nation has tremendous influence. The priests in the nation had tremendous influence. Imagine, the high priest, what is the high priest doing when this guy Manasseh is building all these altars on God's ground, the Temple Mount? What is the high priest doing to stop any of these things? Nothing is the answer. He caused Judah to sin with his idols. I wonder, just as an aside, what will happen next time our country elects a Democratic president. Where you have reforms under one president, and then the next guy gets in, one generation, only 8 years later, one generation could reverse everything that's happened. So Manasseh fully embraced Satan's false gods and led the people into worse idolatry than before Hezekiah's reforms. My dad cleaned this place up. I'm going to make it even more filthy than it was before he started his reforms. That's what happens. Look for it. The next time we elect a Democrat in our country, they will reverse course more abruptly than it has ever been done before. It's just going to happen. 2 Kings, the next verse. Therefore, Manasseh has done all these evil things, kills his son, offers his own child to a false god, litters Jerusalem with all these false altars to false satanic gods, and the Lord has had enough, and our Creator Yahweh speaks. Therefore, thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel. Hezekiah's son brought this on. It's just astounding how quickly things can change. God says this, behold, listen to me. Focus on what I'm about to say. I'm bringing such calamity on Jerusalem and Judah that whoever hears of it, both his ears will tingle. I'll stretch over Jerusalem the line of Samaria, the northern kingdom. Their capital was Samaria, and just like God destroyed the northern kingdom of Samaria in 722 BC, he is decreeing that he will do the same thing to Jerusalem. I'll stretch over Jerusalem the line of Samaria, the plummet of the house of Ahab, who was the northern, wicked northern king. And this is what God says about this city, whom he chose, the city where he chose to put his name after Manasseh did all these things to his city, to his worship site. I'll wipe Jerusalem as one wipes a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. I'll clean it off like a bulldozer came through here because of what this king did to my people. Nobody lives forever. Manasseh dies in verse 19 of this chapter. It says Amon was 22 years old when he became king. This is Manasseh's son. He reigned 2 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Meshullemet, the daughter of Haruz of Yotbah. Great names for your pets. He did evil in the sight of Yahweh, as Manasseh his father had done. Sometimes you do the opposite of what your dad does. Sometimes you do the same thing. And this man chose to do the same thing his father Manasseh had done. The next verse says, for he walked. What does that mean, that he did all the same things of his father? He walked in all the way that his father had walked. He served the idols that his father had served and worshiped them. All the hosts of heaven, the sun, the moon, the stars, etc. All the false gods in the temple, all the altars that were built there. This man bows to all of these altars. He forsook Yahweh. Because what's God's greatest commandment? When you go to the 10 Commandments, what does God want more than anything? Worship me alone. I'm the only God. Yahweh is my name. I will have no other gods before me. Don't make an idol. Even if you're making an idol to represent who I am, you've never seen me, so you can't craft anything that represents me. Don't make an idol and don't worship anything but me. That's idolatry at the heart, at the root of it. Worshiping anything other than Yahweh, our Creator, is idolatry. And this man did that. He abandoned, forsook is a word that means abandoned. He walked away from worshiping Yahweh only, the God of his fathers, like Hezekiah, and did not walk in the way of the Lord Yahweh. How long did he last, this son? Not very long, 2 years. The servants, he was killed by his own servants. The servants of Amon the king conspired against him and killed the king in his own house. I wonder who brought that on. Anybody have a guess who Amon's son is? Wonderful Hezekiah, evil Manasseh, evil Amon, and then the great Josiah. It's crazy how the same bloodline, how the same family DNA strand can produce such free will at its best. His servants conspired against him, killed the king, the people of the land. The Jews killed all those who had conspired against their king Amon, and the people of the land made Josiah, his son, king in his place. This is the king who's a little bitty boy, who will take the kingship, who will again go back to the days of his great-grandfather, try to purify the land from what Manasseh did wrong, try to purify the land from what Amon kept in the land, all the altars and all the false things. He's going to try to purify the land from this. His dad and his grandfather were the horrible kings, and his great-grandfather was great. It's this guy that God sends a message through Zephaniah. It's at the time that Josiah lives. What I'm trying to tell you is, too much had already gone on. God had already said, I'm going to wipe Jerusalem like one wipes a dish. Because of what Manasseh has done, I'm going to wipe this place out. 20 years go by, and he rolls the Babylonians into the land of Canaan to take Israel out. So the people of the land make Josiah king. He was buried in his grave. This is his father Amon, Josiah's dad. He was buried in his grave in the garden of Uzzah, and Josiah, his son, became king in his place. A couple more verses and we close. Josiah, 2 Kings chapter 22, verse 1. You say, well, if things are going to look up, why isn't Zephaniah's message happy? Why isn't it only restorative? Because God had already made his decree. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king. He reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Yedidah, the daughter of Adiah of Boskat. He did right. His father had chosen to do evil like his father had chosen. But Josiah chooses to rise above his culture, to get back to the law of Yahweh and do right. We get to choose our course in life. We can either choose evil or choose righteousness. This man chose righteousness. He did right in the sight of the Lord and walked in all the way of his father David, nor did he turn aside to the right or to the left. Clearly, David is his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. But in the way that his great-great-grandfather David had worshiped God, that's the way that this man chose to worship God. A few verses later it says, then Hilkiah the high priest. Josiah is grown up. He's like 19 years old. I forget the exact date. I've taught this before, but he was a very, very young man when he decides we need to purify Israel. And this is why he did it. Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the scribe, I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. Can you imagine that? The book of the law of Moses had been lost. The Mosaic Code not only wasn't being followed, it wasn't even in existence. They didn't know where it was. The high priest had totally lost grip on what he was doing. And as they're going through the house, I'm sure having to weave around all these altars to the sun, the moon, the God, and all this garbage that Manasseh had built up, they find the book of the law. Hilkiah is the high priest, gave the book to Shaphan, and Shaphan read it. What does God think about the current condition in Judah? Moreover, Shaphan the scribe told the king, he said, so Hilkiah the priest has given me a book. Like, who knew this book existed? We have found this treasure. Look what it says. Shaphan read it in the presence of the king. And when the king heard the words of the book of the law, he tore his clothes because he knew we are not doing what our Creator, the God of our fathers, Yahweh, wants us to do. And he could finally see it in print. He had the word of the Lord before him, and he tore his clothes. He says, go inquire of Yahweh for me. According to this book you've just read me, we can inquire of Yahweh through the high priest. Apparently this man has an outfit, Urim and Thummim in it. Go inquire of the Lord for me and the people and all Judah concerning the words of this book that has been found. What are we to do at this juncture in our nation's history? What do we do, Yahweh? How can we make this right by you? For great is the wrath of Yahweh that burns against us, because our fathers, like Manasseh and Ammon and others, have not listened to the words of this book. Nor did they even know it existed. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. It got lost in the temple. They have not listened to the words of this book to do according to all that is written concerning us. A couple verses later, thus says Yahweh. So what does Yahweh tell Josiah, who wants to purify Judah, get back to worshiping Yahweh, walk away from all the false gods? God says, behold, I bring evil on this place and on its inhabitants, even all the words of the book which the king of Judah has read. I would direct you to Deuteronomy chapter 28, starting in verse 15 forward. What does God say? I will bring evil on this place, just as I have written in this book. Deuteronomy chapter 28, Leviticus chapter 26, you will find the curses that God promised Israel for disobedience. God says, you're a good king. You're a righteous man to tear your clothes and to recognize you're not doing right by me. But it's too little and it's too late. Because they have forsaken me. Remember, it's only 20 years later that these things occur in Zephaniah's day. From 2 Kings chapter 22, a very short period before Israel begins to start going out. A good 40 years before they're totally destroyed, before Jerusalem is destroyed. But God says, because they have abandoned me, forsaken me, and have burned incense to other gods, that they might provoke me to anger with all the work of their hands, therefore, because of their choices, because of what Manasseh chose to do, my wrath burns against this place, and it shall not be quenched. I have made my decision. The decree is etched in stone. It won't change, Josiah. But in the awful generations, there's always that remnant of obedient Jews. Josiah was one of them. And God has this to say to Josiah. While in the very same breath he says, you cannot avoid the destruction. It's coming. I've decreed it. It will happen. In the very same breath, shall not be quenched. He says this to someone who wants to be obedient, but to the king of Judah who sent you to inquire of the Lord, you shall say thus to him, thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel. Wouldn't you love to have a personal message from God like that? Regarding the words which you have heard, the Bible, the scrolls that you have read, the book of the law, because your heart was tender and you humbled yourself before the Lord when you heard what I spoke against this place and against its inhabitants, that they should become a desolation and a curse. Because your heart was right, you have torn your clothes and have wept before me. I truly have heard you. Josiah could have lifted up his fist in indignation toward God. You won't do this to us. We'll build a tower, and you won't be able to destroy earth again. We'll build a tower, and we'll pitch it with waterproof pitch, and we'll build it all up into the heavens. I'm talking about the Tower of Babel. There's nothing new under the sun. Josiah could have been indignant toward God, but instead he was humble toward the Lord. He had a tender heart. He recognized that this desolation and this curse that God had decreed was righteous and fair and just. We deserve that. Based on what I've just been read in the book of the law, God says, I heard you. So personal. Therefore, behold, he says to King Josiah, I will gather you. And Zephaniah is writing while these things are occurring right here. Therefore, behold, I will gather you to your fathers, and you will be gathered to your grave in peace. I'm going to hold things together while you're king. And your eyes will not see all the evil which I will bring on this place. I'm going to wipe it like a dish. But I'll let you live long enough to not see it. So they brought word back to the king. One more. This is it. The king, Josiah, stood by the pillar, and he made a covenant before Yahweh, an agreement with God, just like Moses and the Israelites had made at Mount Sinai. A covenant, an agreement. They're reinstituting the Mosaic law here. You will be our God, we will be your people. All things that you say, we will do. That's what goes on in the days of Josiah. The king stood by the pillar, made a covenant before Yahweh to walk after the Lord, to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes with all his heart and all his soul, to carry out the words of this covenant that were written in this book. He found the Bible, he recognized the truth of the Scripture, and he realized that Israel, Judah, had to get back in covenant relationship with Yahweh. And it says all the people entered into the covenant. Still, too little, too late. Zephaniah again prophesied during this exact time. 2 Kings chapter 21, 22, 23. That's when our guy Zephaniah, when God gave him the word, I will utterly destroy Jerusalem. That's when Zephaniah is writing during the revival in the land led by another great king, this man Josiah. Remember, he's royal family. Zephaniah is related to Hezekiah, the once great king of 4 generations before. He's related as cousin to this great king Josiah leading revival. And yet Zephaniah has to tell the people Israel, God is going to come through and destroy you completely. Not only you, Judah, not only the city Bethlehem, but the surrounding Gentile nations also. In this King Josiah, we see a national revival, a spiritual revival. He's known as the most righteous king in Israel's history. I can't believe I didn't write it, give you the verse on the board, but another same soliloquy. There's been no king like him who's ever risen, who turned to the Lord with all his heart, soul, and strength. He's known as the most righteous king because of what he did here in making this covenant with the people. But it wasn't enough to stop Yahweh's wrath from being poured out on Judah very soon after his prophecy. We'll go back to Zephaniah one more time next Wednesday. We'll pick a promise in the restoration section of the book. It was very important to me to show you how it is that Zephaniah, history is very important to me. And when you understand where Zephaniah lives in the reign of Josiah, great king, how is it that God can say, I'm going to do all these horrible things to Jerusalem? It's because of what has already been done in the land. I hesitate with all my heart to ask if anybody has any questions, but as a lot tonight. Does anybody have any questions? Maybe later. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father,